In the vast emptiness of space, far beyond the reaches of Earth's familiar constellations, floated a starship named Vanguard. It was sleek and modern, its metallic hull glinting faintly under the light of distant stars. The ship housed a crew of 12, each chosen for their expertise in navigating the unknown corners of the galaxy. Among them was Captain Ryan Carter, a man whose calm demeanor masked years of experience dealing with danger. His leadership had saved his team from countless perils, but nothing could have prepared him or any of them for what they were about to encounter. On this particular day, the Vanguard drifted silently through an uncharted sector of space. The crew had been on a routine mission, tasked with mapping out new star systems and searching for signs of intelligent life. So far, the journey had been uneventful. Long hours spent monitoring instruments, analyzing data, and sharing quiet conversations in the mess hall. But that all changed when Lisa Monroe, the ship's communications officer, noticed something unusual. Lisa sat at her station, her fingers hovering over the controls as she scanned various frequencies. Her job was to listen for anything that might indicate the presence of other beings, radio signals, energy pulses, or even stray fragments of alien languages. She had always found the work fascinating, like piecing together a puzzle scattered across the cosmos. Today, however, something different caught her attention. At first, it was barely audible, a faint crackle amidst the static, but as she adjusted the dials, the sound grew clearer. It wasn't a language, nor was it some mechanical hum. It was laughter, human laughter. The realization sent a chill down Lisa's spine. She froze, staring at the console as if it might suddenly explain itself. How could there be human laughter out here in the middle of nowhere? There were no colonies nearby, no ships reported missing in this region. And yet, the sound was unmistakable, a series of giggles, chuckles, and full-blown guffaws overlapping one another in chaotic harmony. It sounded almost forced, like people trying too hard to laugh despite feeling uneasy. Curious and more than a little unnerved, Lisa called Captain Carter over. He approached her station, his brow furrowed as he listened to the recording she played back for him. "What is this?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "I don't know, sir," Lisa replied, shaking her head. "It's coming from somewhere ahead of us. I've never heard anything like it before." Ryan studied the readings on the screen, noting the direction and approximate distance of the signal. It was weak, as though it had traveled unimaginable distances before reaching them. Still, it was strong enough to pinpoint its origin. After a moment of thought, he gave the order. "Set a course for the source. Let's find out what we're dealing with." As the Vanguard adjusted its trajectory, the mood aboard the ship shifted subtly. Conversations became quieter, and the usual camaraderie among the crew seemed dampened by an unspoken tension. Even those who hadn't heard the laughter firsthand felt its weight hanging in the air. What did it mean? Was it a message, a warning, or something else entirely? Among the crew, Adam Reed, the ship's biologist, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had joined the mission not just out of scientific curiosity, but also because he believed humanity's future depended on understanding the universe. Yet now, faced with this inexplicable phenomenon, he found himself questioning whether some mysteries were better left unsolved. Megan Cole, the ship's engineer, tried to keep her focus on maintaining the Vanguard's systems. But even she couldn't ignore the unease spreading among her colleagues. As she worked, she occasionally glanced up at the main viewport, half expecting to see something looming in the darkness outside. Nothing appeared, of course, but the sense of being watched lingered nonetheless. Hours passed as the ship drew closer to the source of the laughter. When they finally arrived, the sight before them was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. A planet hung suspended against the blackness of space, its surface scarred and barren. Its atmosphere shimmered faintly, giving it an almost ghostly appearance. Orbiting the planet was a ring of debris, remnants of structures long since destroyed. It looked like the aftermath of some catastrophic event, a world that had once thrived but now lay dead and forgotten. Scans show no signs of current activity, Lisa reported, her voice subdued. But the signal is definitely coming from the surface. Ryan nodded. Prepare a landing party, we'll investigate. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some, like Adam, were eager to uncover the truth behind the laughter, while others, like Megan, hesitated, sensing danger lurking beneath the planet's desolate exterior. Nevertheless, orders were orders, and soon a small group consisting of Ryan, Lisa, Adam, and Megan stood ready to descend onto the mysterious world. As their shuttle broke through the thin atmosphere, the landscape below came into sharper focus. Towering ruins dotted the terrain, their jagged shapes casting long shadows under the dim light of a dying sun. The ground was cracked and dry, littered with fragments of stone and metal. It was clear that whatever civilization had once existed here had fallen into ruin long ago. Upon landing, the team stepped cautiously onto the dusty surface. The air was thick and heavy, making every movement feel sluggish. They activated their helmet's environmental filters, ensuring they wouldn't breathe in any harmful particles. As they moved toward the nearest structure, the silence around them was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. Inside the ruins, they discovered walls covered in strange carvings. The images depicted humanoid figures, engaged in various activities, but one motif recurred repeatedly: faces contorted in laughter. Some of the figures appeared normal, while others were grotesquely distorted, their mouths stretched impossibly wide, their eyes bulging. The contrast between joy and terror was jarring, leaving the team unsettled. "This doesn't make sense," Adam muttered, running his gloved hand over one of the carvings. "Why would anyone depict laughter like this? It's almost monstrous." No one had an answer. Instead, they pressed deeper into the ruins, hoping to find some clue that might explain the eerie transmission they had intercepted. Megan spotted a doorway leading to a lower level and motioned for the others to follow. Descending a narrow staircase, they entered a chamber unlike anything they had seen so far. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface etched with intricate patterns. Surrounding it were crystalline structures embedded in the walls, pulsating with a soft blue glow. The air seemed charged with energy, making the hairs on their necks stand on end. Without hesitation, Lisa reached out and touched the pedestal. Instantly, a holographic projection sprang to life above it. The image showed scenes of humans laughing uncontrollably, their bodies twisting and contorting in horrifying ways. Their faces morphed into masks of madness, their expressions frozen in eternal mirth. Overlaid on the footage was a single phrase, repeated again and again: "Laughter will free us." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ryan broke the silence. What the hell does that mean? No one knew. But as they stared at the projection, one thing became painfully clear. They had stumbled upon something far darker and far stranger than they could have imagined. The team stood frozen, their eyes locked on the holographic projection. The images of laughing humans, twisting, writhing, and transforming into something monstrous, played over and over. It was hypnotic yet horrifying, a loop they couldn't look away from. Each frame seemed to burrow deeper into their minds, planting seeds of unease that would soon grow into full-blown dread. Lisa Monroe was the first to break free of the trance. She stepped back from the pedestal, her breath quickening inside her helmet. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. This isn't right." Captain Ryan Carter nodded slowly, though his gaze remained fixed on the projection. He had seen many strange things in his years of space exploration, but nothing like this. The phrase "laughter will free us" echoed in his mind, its meaning as elusive as it was unsettling. What did it mean to be freed by laughter? And why did it feel less like liberation and more like a curse? Adam Reed, the biologist, leaned closer to examine the crystalline structures embedded in the walls. They pulsed with a soft blue light, their glow casting eerie shadows across the chamber. Something about them felt alive, almost sentient. As he reached out to touch one, Megan Cole grabbed his arm. "Don't," she warned sharply. Her tone startled him, and he pulled his hand back instinctively. We don't know what these things are or what they do. We can't afford to take chances. Adam frowned but didn't argue. He knew Megan was right. They were treading on dangerous ground surrounded by artifacts of an alien civilization whose motives were completely unknown. Still, his curiosity burned brightly. If there was any chance of understanding what had happened here, it might lie within those crystals. Ryan finally turned away from the hologram and addressed the group. Let's document everything we can and then get back to the ship. Whatever this is, it's beyond us. We'll analyze it later when we're safe. The others nodded in agreement, though none of them felt particularly reassured. They began taking scans and photographs, careful not to disturb anything further. Lisa recorded audio notes describing the carvings, the crystals, and the disturbing footage. Adam took samples of dust and debris, sealing them in sterile containers for analysis. Megan inspected the structural integrity of the ruins, ensuring there were no immediate threats of collapse. As they worked, the oppressive atmosphere of the planet weighed heavily on them. The silence outside was unnerving, broken only by the occasional groan of shifting stone or the faint hum of energy emanating from the crystals. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow seemed to move just out of the corner of their eye. The longer they stayed, the stronger the feeling that they weren't alone. Megan noticed it first, a subtle vibration beneath her feet. At first she thought it might be an aftershock from some ancient seismic activity, but the tremors grew stronger and more rhythmic. She glanced at the others who had stopped working to listen. "Do you feel that?" she asked. They all nodded, exchanging worried looks. The vibrations intensified, accompanied by a low, guttural noise that seemed to come from deep within the earth. It wasn't mechanical, it was organic, like the growl of some great beast stirring from slumber. The temperature in the chamber dropped noticeably and their breath fogged up the insides of their helmets. "We need to leave. Now," Ryan said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. But before they could act, the holographic projection flickered and changed. The laughing figures disappeared, replaced by a new image, a map of the planet glowing faintly against the dimness of the chamber. Certain areas were highlighted in red, pulsing in time with the vibrations. One of the red spots was directly beneath their current location. "What is that?" Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing rumble. "It's showing us something," Adam replied, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. Maybe it's marking important sites or danger zones. Or both," Megan muttered grimly. The ground shook violently, forcing them to brace themselves against the walls. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and cracks began to form in the stone around them. Ryan barked orders, urging everyone toward the exit. They moved as quickly as they could, their movements hampered by the quaking floor and the bulky equipment they carried. Just as they reached the staircase leading upward, the chamber behind them collapsed with a deafening roar. Chunks of rock and crystal tumbled into the void, sending shockwaves rippling through the ruins. The team scrambled up the stairs, hearts pounding as they emerged into the open air. Outside, the sky had darkened ominously, clouds swirling overhead despite the lack of wind. The landscape around them seemed to shift and writhe, as if the very ground was alive. Shadows danced unnaturally along the horizon, elongating and twisting into shapes that defied logic. It was as though the planet itself was reacting to their presence, or perhaps to the activation of the hologram. "This place is falling apart," Megan said, her voice tight with panic. "We have to get off-world immediately." Ryan didn't need convincing. He activated his communicator and hailed the Vanguard. "This is Captain Carter. Prepare the shuttle for immediate departure. Repeat, prepare the shuttle." Static crackled in response, followed by a faint voice. "Captain, a signal weak, interference." "Damn it," Ryan muttered under his breath. He tried again, louder this time. "Shuttle prep complete?" The reply was garbled, but he caught enough to understand that the shuttle was ready. Without wasting another second, the team sprinted toward their landing site, dodging falling debris and navigating the increasingly unstable terrain. As they ran, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced over his shoulder repeatedly, half expecting to see something emerge from the ruins or the shadows. Nothing appeared, but the sensation persisted, gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. When they finally reached the shuttle, relief washed over them, all except Lisa, who stumbled slightly as she climbed aboard. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she strapped herself into her seat. Ryan noticed and knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She hesitated before answering. I think so. It's just, I keep hearing it." "Hearing what?" Ryan pressed. "The laughter," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's in my head. Faint, but it won't stop." Ryan exchanged a concerned glance with Megan, who shrugged helplessly. Whatever was happening, it was clear that the planet had left its mark on them, not just physically but mentally as, well. Once everyone was secured, Megan powered up the shuttle and lifted off. Through the viewport, they watched the ruins shrink below them, swallowed by the chaotic landscape. As they ascended, the vibrations ceased, and the unnatural darkness receded, revealing the dull gray skies once more. For a moment it seemed like they had escaped, but as the shuttle docked with the Vanguard and the crew disembarked, they realized the planet's influence hadn't ended with their departure. Strange occurrences began unfolding almost immediately. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Lights flickered sporadically throughout the ship. And worst of all, faint giggles echoed through the corridors, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. No one spoke about it openly, but the fear was palpable. Each member of the crew carried the weight of what they had witnessed, haunted by the memory of those laughing, contorted faces. They had uncovered a truth far darker than they could have imagined, and now it seemed that truth had followed them home. Back on the bridge, Ryan stared out at the stars, his mind racing. He knew they couldn't stay here. The planet was too dangerous, too unpredictable. But leaving meant carrying whatever they had awakened back into the wider galaxy. Was that a risk they could afford to take? Or had they already unleashed something that could never be contained? For now, there were no answers, only questions and the lingering sound of laughter drifting through the empty halls of the Vanguard. The Vanguard drifted silently through the void, its engines humming softly as it put distance between itself and the desolate planet. On the surface, everything seemed normal. The ship's systems functioned smoothly. The crew went about their duties and the stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport. But beneath this veneer of routine, an unsettling tension gripped the ship. It wasn't just the strange occurrences that had begun since their return from the planet. It was the feeling that something unseen, something malevolent, had hitched a ride with them. Lisa Monroe sat in her quarters, staring blankly at the wall. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a cup of lukewarm coffee. The laughter hadn't stopped. It played on a loop inside her head, faint but persistent, like a radio tuned to a distant station. At first, she had tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was stress or exhaustion. But the sound grew louder each time she closed her eyes, until she could no longer distinguish whether it was real or imagined. She wondered if anyone else heard it too, or if she was losing her mind. Down in engineering, Megan Cole worked tirelessly to diagnose the ship's malfunctions. Lights flickered sporadically, panels short-circuited without warning, and sensors reported phantom readings that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Normally, these issues would have been easy to fix, but now every solution seemed to lead to another problem. Frustrated, Megan leaned against a console and wiped sweat from her brow. For the first time in her career, she felt powerless against the technology she knew so well. Adam Reed, meanwhile, spent hours poring over the samples he had collected from the planet. Under the microscope, the dust and debris revealed nothing unusual, just fragments of rock and traces of ancient metal alloys. Yet when he analyzed the crystalline shards embedded in the samples, something strange happened. The crystals emitted a low-frequency pulse, barely detectable but consistent. As he studied them further, he noticed patterns emerging, patterns that resembled brainwave activity. It was as though the crystals were alive, responding to stimuli in ways he couldn't explain. Captain Ryan Carter called a meeting in the briefing room to discuss their findings. The atmosphere was tense as the team gathered around the table, avoiding eye contact and speaking only when necessary. Ryan opened the discussion by summarizing what they knew. The planet had once hosted an advanced civilization obsessed with human laughter, which somehow led to their downfall. The crystalline structures pulsed with energy, and the ruins contained carvings depicting humans transformed into grotesque, laughing figures. Beyond that, however, they were no closer to understanding the true nature of what they had encountered. "We need to figure out how to neutralize whatever we brought back," Ryan said firmly. "If those crystals are affecting the ship's systems and possibly our minds, we can't risk keeping them aboard." Megan nodded. "I agree, but getting rid of them might not be enough. Something feels off, like the ship itself is changing." Her words hung heavily in the air. No one wanted to admit it, but they all felt it. The subtle shift in the environment, the way the corridors seemed narrower, the hum of the engines slightly distorted. Even the artificial gravity felt inconsistent, making movement awkward at times. It was as if the Vanguard had become a living organism, adapting to some unknown influence. Lisa hesitated before speaking up. "There's something else," she began, her voice barely audible. All eyes turned to her and she swallowed hard before continuing. "I keep hearing laughter. In my head. It's faint, but it won't stop. I thought I was imagining it at first, but now I'm not so sure." A heavy silence followed her confession. Slowly, Adam raised his hand. "I've been having nightmares," he admitted. "About the planet, about those carvings and the laughter, and it's there too. I wake up sweating, convinced someone's in the room with me." The others exchanged uneasy glances. One by one, they shared similar experiences. Muffled giggles echoing in empty hallways, shadowy figures glimpsed out of the corner of their eyes, an overwhelming sense of being watched. Even Ryan confessed to feeling increasingly paranoid, as though the ship were closing in on him. "It's psychological warfare," Megan suggested, finally breaking the silence. "Whatever we brought back isn't just messing with the ship, it's targeting us, driving us insane." Ryan rubbed his temples, trying to think clearly despite the growing pressure in his skull. "We need to isolate the source. If it's the crystals, we'll jettison them. If it's something else..." He trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Over the next few hours, the crew worked together to gather all the artifacts they had brought back from the planet. Adam carefully sealed the crystalline shards in containment units, while Megan ran diagnostics on the affected systems. Lisa monitored communications, hoping to identify any external interference that might explain the phenomena. Despite their efforts, the disturbances persisted, growing more frequent and intense. That evening, as the crew prepared to retire for the night, disaster struck. A loud crash echoed through the ship, followed by screams. Ryan rushed to the source of the commotion, his heart pounding. What he found chilled him to the bone. In the medical bay, Adam lay convulsing on the floor, his face contorted in a manic grin. His laughter filled the room, high-pitched and hysterical, drowning out his cries of pain. Dr. Karen Hayes knelt beside him, struggling to restrain him as his body began to change. His skin stretched unnaturally, his jaw distended, and his eyes bulged grotesquely. It was as though he was transforming into one of the figures from the carvings. "Get back!" Ryan shouted, pulling Karen away, just as Adam's transformation accelerated. Within moments, he was unrecognizable, a twisted mockery of a human being, consumed by uncontrollable laughter. He lunged at the nearest bulkhead, smashing it with terrifying strength before stumbling out into the corridor. Panic spread through the ship as word of Adam's condition reached the others. Megan locked down the affected sections, sealing off access to prevent the creature from spreading further. Lisa frantically searched for any sign of external control, convinced that someone, or something, was manipulating events from afar. Ryan coordinated the response, barking orders into his communicator while trying to maintain order among the terrified crew. But the situation spiraled out of control. More crew members began exhibiting symptoms, fits of uncontrollable laughter, physical distortions, and violent behavior. Those who resisted the infection barricaded themselves in safe zones, clutching makeshift weapons and praying for salvation. The laughter echoed relentlessly through the halls, a maddening symphony that drove even the strongest minds to the brink of collapse. Amid the chaos, Lisa made a startling discovery. Buried within the data from the planet's ruins was a fragment of text written in broken English. Laughter binds, laughter consumes, laughter spreads. Suddenly, the horrifying truth became clear. The ancient civilization hadn't merely studied human laughter, they had weaponized it, turning joy into a virus capable of corrupting both body and mind. And now, the Vanguard had become its carrier. Desperate to contain the outbreak, Ryan ordered the remaining unaffected crew to retreat to the bridge, sealing it off from the rest of the ship. There they huddled together, listening to the sounds of madness raging outside. Megan worked furiously to disable the ship's internal systems, hoping to cut off whatever connection the infection had established. Lisa replayed the holographic message repeatedly, searching for clues that might offer a solution. Ryan paced back and forth, wrestling with guilt and helplessness. "We can't let this reach Earth," he said finally, his voice grim. "If we fail here, humanity will pay the price." No one argued. They all understood the stakes. Whatever horrors awaited them, they had to ensure the infection never left the confines of the Vanguard. As the laughter grew louder and the ship groaned under the strain, they braced themselves for the final confrontation. A battle not just for survival, but for the fate of their species. And somewhere deep within the bowels of the ship, atoms, laughter continued, a haunting reminder of the cost of curiosity and the terrifying power of unchecked emotion. The Vanguard was no longer the safe haven it had once been. The ship, once a symbol of human ingenuity and exploration, had become a prison, a labyrinth of fear and despair where every corner hid a new nightmare. The laughter that echoed through its corridors was relentless, growing louder with each passing hour. It seeped into the minds of the crew, gnawing at their sanity until they could barely think straight. For those who remained unaffected, or at least appeared to be, they clung to one another for support, knowing full well that safety was an illusion. On the bridge, Captain Ryan Carter stood staring at the main viewport, his hands gripping the railing tightly. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, offering no solace or answers. He felt trapped not just by the physical confines of the ship, but by the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. His decisions had led them here, and now he had to find a way out before it was too late. But how? What could they possibly do against something they didn't even understand? Behind him, Lisa Monroe sat hunched over a console, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't slept in days, haunted by the constant sound of laughter in her head. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw visions of twisted figures reaching for her, their grotesque grins mocking her attempts to escape. Still, she forced herself to focus, scrolling through lines of data in search of anything that might help them survive. Her fingers trembled as she typed, exhaustion clouding her thoughts. Megan Cole paced nervously near the engineering station, occasionally glancing at the sealed door leading to the rest of the ship. Beyond it lay chaos. The infected crew members, rampaging through the halls, their bodies warped beyond recognition. Adam's transformation had been only the beginning. One by one, others had succumbed to the same fate, their humanity stripped away until nothing remained but hollow shells driven solely by mirth and madness. Megan couldn't shake the image of Adam's final moments. The way his laughter had turned manic, almost gleeful, as his body contorted into something unnatural. It was a memory she knew would haunt her forever. "We can't stay here," Megan said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "If we don't act soon, whatever this is will take all of us." Ryan turned to face her, his expression grim. "I know," he replied. "But we're running out of options. We've tried isolating the crystals, disabling systems, everything we can think of. Nothing works." "Maybe we're looking at this the wrong way," Lisa interjected softly. Both Ryan and Megan looked at her, surprised by the steadiness in her voice despite her obvious fatigue. "What if it's not about stopping the infection directly? What if we need to understand why it happened in the first place?" Ryan frowned. You mean go back to the planet? No, Lisa said quickly. Not physically, mentally. We already have pieces of the puzzle. The carvings, the hologram, the message, laughter will free us. Maybe there's more to it than we realized. Her words sparked a flicker of hope in the room. They had spent so much time reacting to the horrors around them that they hadn't stopped to truly analyze what they were facing. Perhaps understanding the enemy was the key to defeating it, or at least surviving it. With renewed determination, the trio set to work. Lisa revisited the recordings from the ruins, playing back the holographic message repeatedly while cross-referencing it with the translated fragments of text. Megan focused on the crystalline shards, examining their energy patterns and attempting to replicate the frequencies they emitted. Ryan, meanwhile, reviewed the mission logs, piecing together every detail of their encounter with the planet in hopes of finding overlooked clues. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional hum of machinery or the distant echo of laughter filtering through the walls. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. Lisa noticed that the phrase, "laughter will free us," wasn't just a statement. It was a directive. The ancient civilization hadn't viewed laughter as a weapon. They had seen it as liberation. Their experiments weren't meant to harm but to transform, to elevate humanity to some higher state of existence. Of course, things had gone horribly wrong, resulting in the destruction of their world and the corruption of anyone exposed to their creations. But the intent behind it was clear. Laughter was power, raw and uncontrollable. Megan confirmed Lisa's theory when she discovered that the crystals acted as conduits, amplifying emotional states to dangerous levels. In essence, they took joy and turned it into hysteria, overwhelming the brain and body until collapse was inevitable. What started as harmless amusement spiraled into madness, consuming everything in its path. This isn't just a virus, Megan explained, pointing to the readouts on her screen. It's a feedback loop. Once it takes hold, it feeds on itself, growing stronger with every laugh, every scream. That's why we can't stop it. We're fighting something that thrives on emotion. So what do we do? Ryan asked, his voice tinged with desperation. How do we break the cycle? Lisa hesitated before answering. We sever the connection. Whatever ties the crystals to our minds has to be cut. If we can isolate ourselves emotionally, if we can shut off our ability to feel, it might give us a chance. The idea was risky, bordering on impossible. Humans were creatures of emotion. Their very existence depended on feeling. To suppress that entirely would require a level of discipline few possessed, yet it was their only shot at survival. Ryan nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll do. Starting now, we lock down the bridge completely. No contact with the rest of the ship unless absolutely necessary, and we focus on staying calm no matter what happens. They fortified their position, sealing off vents and reinforcing bulkheads to prevent any breaches. Inside, they dimmed the lights and silenced unnecessary alarms, creating an environment devoid of stimuli. Each member of the team took turns, monitoring vital signs, ensuring none of them showed early symptoms of infection. It was exhausting work, both physically and mentally, but they held fast to the belief that they could endure. For a while, it seemed to work. The laughter outside grew fainter, muffled by the barriers they had erected. The infected crew members banged against the doors occasionally, their distorted voices pleading to be let in, but the group resisted. They practiced deep breathing, exercises, recited calming mantras, and avoided speaking unless absolutely necessary. Even small talk was forbidden, as emotions, even positive ones, could trigger the feedback loop. But peace was fleeting. One night, as Megan monitored the systems, she noticed something alarming. The crystals embedded in the samples Adam had collected were glowing brighter than ever before, pulsating in sync with the faint giggles still audible in the distance. Worse, the energy readings matched the neural activity of the infected crew members, suggesting a direct link between the two. They're learning, Megan whispered, her voice trembling. Whatever this thing is, it's adapting. Ryan and Lisa joined her at the console, their faces etched with worry. Learning how to bypass our defenses, Ryan muttered darkly. Great. Before they could formulate a plan, the ship shuddered, violently throwing them off balance. Alarms blared and red warning lights flashed across the bridge. Through the comm system came a chorus of laughter, louder, sharper, and more synchronized than before. It was as though the entire ship had come alive, its structure vibrating with malevolent glee. "They're trying to break in," Lisa said, her voice barely audible over the din. Ryan clenched his fists, his mind racing. "We can't hold them off forever. We need to destroy the source now." "But how?" Megan asked, panic creeping into her tone. "If we open the doors, they'll overwhelm us." "There's another way," Ryan said firmly. "We rig the ship's reactor to overload, set it on a timer, and evacuate using the escape pods. It's the only way to ensure the infection doesn't spread." The idea was drastic, almost unthinkable. Sacrificing the Vanguard meant losing everything, their home, their mission, their lives' work, but it also meant saving countless others from suffering the same fate. There was no other choice. Without hesitation, the team sprang into action. Megan worked on preparing the reactor, setting it to detonate in 15 minutes. Lisa gathered essential data, downloading files onto portable drives to preserve their findings. Ryan coordinated the evacuation, ensuring everyone remaining on the bridge understood the plan. As they prepared to leave, Ryan paused for a moment, looking around the bridge one last time. This ship had been his pride, his purpose. Now it would serve as a tomb for the horror they had unleashed. With a heavy heart, he activated the emergency protocol and led the others toward the escape pod bay. Behind them, the laughter grew deafening, filling the air with a cacophony of insanity. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and writhing like living things. The infected pounded on the doors, their distorted faces pressed against the glass, mouths stretched wide in eternal grins. "Keep moving," Ryan shouted, urging his team forward. They reached the escape pods just as the first wave of infected broke through the barricades. Slamming the hatch shut behind them, they launched into space mere seconds before the Vanguard erupted in a brilliant explosion. Floating amidst the wreckage, the survivors watched as the flames consumed the remnants of their former lives. The laughter faded into silence, replaced by the cold emptiness of the void. They had survived, but at what cost? The escape pod floated silently through the vast emptiness of space, its small interior cramped and dimly lit. Inside, the surviving crew members sat in stunned silence, their minds still reeling from the events that had unfolded aboard the Vanguard. The laughter was gone now, replaced by a heavy, oppressive quiet that seemed to press down on them like a physical weight. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they were safe, or at least as safe as one could be adrift in the void, with no clear destination ahead. Captain Ryan Carter leaned back against the wall of the pod, his face pale and drawn. His hands rested limply in his lap, trembling slightly as adrenaline slowly gave way to exhaustion. He stared blankly at the floor, replaying the final moments of the Vanguard in his mind. The explosion had been both a relief and a tragedy, a necessary sacrifice to stop the infection, but also the loss of everything they had worked for. The ship had been more than just a vessel. It had been their home, their mission, their hope for discovery. Now it was nothing but ash and debris scattered across the galaxy. Beside him, Lisa Monroe clutched a data drive tightly in her hand, her knuckles white from the effort. On that tiny device was all the information they had gathered about the planet, the crystals, and the horrifying truth behind human laughter. It was a burden she wasn't sure she wanted to carry. She glanced at the others. Megan Cole hunched over a diagnostic panel, trying to assess their chances of survival, and Karen Hayes, the ship's doctor, sitting quietly with her eyes closed, muttering something under her breath. They were broken, each in their own way, but they were alive. That had to count for something. "We need to figure out where we're going," Megan said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was calm but strained, betraying the fear simmering beneath the surface. "We can't just float here forever." Ryan nodded slowly, forcing himself to focus. "Agreed. Let's see if we can locate the nearest star system or outpost. We'll need supplies and answers if we're going to make it through this." Lisa activated the pod's navigation system, her fingers moving automatically despite the fatigue, weighing her down. The screen flickered to life, displaying a map of nearby sectors. After a few moments of searching, she found a faint signal emanating from a distant cluster of stars. "There's something here," she said, pointing to the screen. "It looks like a research station, maybe abandoned, but it's our best shot." "Set a course," Ryan ordered, his tone firm despite the weariness in his voice. "Let's get there as fast as we can." As the pod's engines hummed softly, propelling them toward their uncertain destination, the group fell into an uneasy silence. Each of them was lost in thought, grappling with the enormity of what they had experienced. They had uncovered a truth far darker than any of them could have imagined, a truth that humanity might not be ready to face. And yet, they couldn't ignore it. The infection they had barely escaped was proof that emotions, even something as seemingly harmless as laughter, could become weapons in the wrong hands. Or perhaps not even hands, just forces beyond comprehension. Hours passed, and the tension in the pod grew thicker. The lack of external stimuli made every sound louder, every movement more noticeable. When someone shifted uncomfortably, it felt like the entire craft shook. When someone cleared their throat, it echoed unnaturally in the confined space. Even breathing seemed too loud, too intrusive. The absence of danger was almost worse than its presence. It left too much room for doubt and dread. Karen broke the silence unexpectedly, her voice soft but steady. "Do you think we did the right thing? Destroying the ship?" Her question hung in the air, unanswered for several long seconds. Finally, Ryan spoke. "We didn't have a choice. If we hadn't destroyed the Vanguard, the infection would have spread. We stopped it from reaching Earth, from infecting anyone else. That has to count for something." "But at what cost?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How many more planets like that are out there? How many civilizations have experimented with emotions, turning them into weapons? What happens when we find another one? And we will, sooner or later?" No one had an answer. The implications of what they had discovered were staggering. Humanity's greatest strengths, its capacity for joy, love, and connection, could also be its greatest vulnerabilities. Emotions were powerful, unpredictable, and deeply personal. To weaponize them was to tap into something primal, something uncontrollable. And if other species had already done so, then humanity's days of blissful ignorance were numbered. Megan sighed heavily, rubbing her temples. "We need to warn someone. Earth Command, the Federation, anyone who will listen. This isn't just our problem anymore. It's everyone's." "And what do we tell them?" Lisa countered, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "That laughter is dangerous? That happiness can kill you? No one's going to believe us without proof, and most of our evidence went up in flames with the Vanguard." She held up the data drive, shaking it slightly for emphasis. "This is all we have left. Fragments of text, recordings, and theories. It's not enough to convince anyone, let alone prepare them for what's coming." "Then we'll make it." "Enough," Ryan said firmly, his resolve hardening. "When we reach that research station, we'll gather whatever resources we can. We'll analyze the data, piece together what happened on that planet, and find a way to prove it. If we can't stop these kinds of threats, then at least we can try to understand them, and maybe, just maybe, prevent them from happening again." His words offered little comfort, but they provided direction, a fragile thread of purpose in the chaos. The group nodded in agreement, though none of them truly believed it would be that simple. Still, it was better than giving up. As the pod continued its journey, strange things began to happen. At first, they were subtle, a flicker of light on the control panel, a brief distortion in the navigation display. But soon, the anomalies grew more pronounced. The temperature inside the pod fluctuated wildly, sometimes freezing cold, other times unbearably hot. Static crackled intermittently over the comm system, accompanied by faint whispers that sounded almost like laughter. Lisa froze, her blood running cold. She turned to the others, her wide eyes reflecting the fear gripping her heart. Do you hear that? They all listened intently, their expressions darkening as the sound became clearer. It was laughter, faint but unmistakable, the same laughter that had haunted them aboard the Vanguard. "How is this possible?" Megan demanded, her voice rising in panic. "We destroyed the ship, we destroyed the crystals." "I don't know," Ryan admitted, his jaw tightening. "But whatever it is, it's not letting go." The laughter grew louder, filling the pod with its maddening rhythm. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and writhing like living things. The survivors huddled together, clutching whatever makeshift weapons they could find. A wrench, a flashlight, anything to defend themselves. But deep down they knew it wouldn't be enough. Whatever force had followed them off the planet wasn't bound by physical laws. It was something far older, far darker, and far more intelligent than they could comprehend. Karen whimpered softly, tears streaming down her face. "It's inside us," she whispered. "It's always been inside us." Her words sent a chill through the group. They realized with dawning horror that the infection hadn't been contained within the crystals or the ruins. It had taken root in their minds, feeding on their emotions, their memories, their very essence. The laughter wasn't external. It was internal, a manifestation of their deepest fears and desires twisted into something monstrous. Ryan clenched his fists, fighting back the urge to scream. "We have to stay calm," he said, though his voice wavered. "If we lose control, it wins." But staying calm was easier said than done. The laughter burrowed deeper into their thoughts, dredging up memories they had long buried. Failures, regrets, losses. Lisa saw flashes of her childhood, moments of embarrassment and shame that she had tried to forget. Megan relived the death of her younger brother, the guilt and grief overwhelming her. Even Ryan, stoic and unshakable, found himself confronting the faces of those he had failed to save over the years. One by one they began to laugh, not out of joy but out of despair. The sound was hollow, broken, echoing eerily within the confines of the pod. They fought against it, biting their lips, until they bled, covering their ears in a futile attempt to block out the noise. But the laughter persisted, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing second. And then suddenly it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. The shadows disappeared, the temperature stabilized, and the static faded away. For a moment the survivors dared to hope that it was over, that they had somehow resisted the infection. But as they looked at one another, they saw the truth etched on their faces. Their eyes were glassy, their smiles strained and unnatural. Something had changed within them, something irreversible. They were no longer entirely human. Outside the pod, the stars twinkled innocently, oblivious to the horrors unfolding within. Somewhere in the distance, the research station awaited them, a beacon of hope or perhaps the next chapter in humanity's descent into madness.